Billionaire pretends to sleep to test his maid's son. What the son did next froze him. Maxwell Newton had everything money could buy. 7 mansions. 14 companies. A net worth that could feed a small country for a decade. But on a rainy Saturday afternoon in October, a 7-year-old boy with holes in his shoes gave him something he'd never owned in 75 years of living. His soul. This is not a story about wealth. It's a story about the poverty of the heart. About a man so rich he trusted absolutely no one. And a child so poor he gave away everything. What happened in that library, in those 12 minutes of silence, would rewrite a will worth $1.8 billion. It would reshape a legacy. And it would prove that the smallest act of goodness can echo for generations. This is the story of the test that changed everything. Maxwell Newton didn't start as a monster. He started as a boy who believed in people. A young entrepreneur who gave second chances. A husband who loved without guard. But life has a way of teaching brutal lessons to those who trust too easily. His first business partner, his college roommate, his best friend, embezzled $400,000 and disappeared to Costa Rica. Maxwell rebuilt. His wife of 17 years left him for his younger brother, taking half his fortune in the divorce. Maxwell rebuilt again, but this time with thicker walls. His daughter, his only child, she visited twice a year. Always with a new investment opportunity. Always with her hand extended. Never with a question about how he was sleeping. Never with a memory of his birthday. By 75, Maxwell Newton had learned the only lesson that mattered. Everyone has a price. Everyone will betray you if the number is right. Love is just another transaction, and loyalty expires when the checks stop coming. He lived alone in a 42-room mansion in Connecticut. The halls echoed with his footsteps. His staff changed every few months. He made sure of it. Get close to no one. Trust nothing. Test everything. And on that particular Saturday, as storm clouds gathered over the estate and rain began to hammer the windows, Maxwell Newton decided to run his test one more time. He'd done it before. With gardeners. With chefs. With drivers and housekeepers and accountants. He'd leave money in plain sight, sometimes $100, sometimes $5,000, and pretend to sleep. Pretend to be vulnerable. Pretend to be unaware. And every single time, without fail, the money disappeared. Every single time. It confirmed what he already knew. Humanity was rotten at its core. Greed was the only universal language. And he was right to trust no one. But today's test would be different. Today, he would be proven wrong in a way that would shatter him completely. Miriam Nelson was running late. At 28 years old, she'd already buried a husband, raised a son alone, and worked 3 jobs to keep the lights on in their 1-bedroom apartment. Her hands were calloused from scrubbing floors. Her back ached from double shifts at the diner. Her eyes carried the particular exhaustion of single mothers who never, ever get to rest. The housekeeping job at the Newton estate was her best gig, $32 an hour, 4 hours every Saturday. It was the difference between paying rent and eviction, between groceries and food stamps, between surviving and drowning. But today, she had a problem. Leo's school had closed. The storm had knocked out power in 3 districts, and the emergency text came at 6 a.m., all students stay home. No exceptions. Miriam had called everyone. Her mother, working her own shift. Her neighbor, out of town. The church daycare, closed for renovations. She had no options. No backup plan. No safety net. So she did what desperate mothers do. She made a choice that terrified her. She brought Leo with her. Baby, listen to me. She knelt in front of her 7-year-old son in the mansion service entrance, gripping his small shoulders. Rain dripped from her coat onto the marble floor. You have to be invisible today. You understand? Invisible. Leo nodded, his wide brown eyes serious beyond his years. He wore a jacket 2 sizes too big, his father's jacket, the only thing Marcus had left behind before the factory accident took him. You stay in the back storage room. You read your books. You don't make noise. You don't explore. And if anyone sees you, we'll be in trouble, Leo whispered. We'll lose everything, Miriam corrected, her voice cracking. Mama can't lose this job, baby. We need this. Do you understand? Leo nodded again. He understood more than a 7-year-old should. Poverty teaches children to grow up fast. Miriam hid him in a storage closet near the kitchen with his backpack, a sandwich, and 3 library books about space. She kissed his forehead, whispered a prayer, and went to work. She had 4 hours to clean the East Wing, including Maxwell Newton's personal library. 4 hours to be perfect. To be invisible. To keep her secret. She didn't know that Maxwell Newton was already setting his trap. That $5,000 in crisp $100 bills sat in a manila envelope on his desk. That he was positioned in his leather chair, eyes closed, breathing slowly, pretending to be asleep. Waiting. Always waiting to be proven right about humanity's greed. Before we continue, if you're already hooked by this story, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. You won't regret it. We share stories like this every week, stories that restore your faith in humanity. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I want to know if this story is reaching hearts in Tokyo, Lagos, New York, or a small town I've never heard of. Your location, go. Now, back to the library where everything is about to change. Miriam entered the library at 2:47 p.m. The room was a cathedral of wealth, floor-to-ceiling mahogany shelves, first edition books, a Persian rug worth more than her annual salary. The air smelled like leather and old paper and the particular silence that only money can buy. Maxwell Newton sat in his leather wingback chair near the window, head tilted back, eyes closed. His breathing was slow and rhythmic. Asleep, or so it appeared. On the desk, 8 feet away, sat the manila envelope. Unsealed. The corner of a $100 bill visible. Miriam saw it immediately. Her heart jumped. Not with greed, with fear. Money left out meant a test. Meant a trap. Meant someone would be accused of something. She'd worked enough wealthy homes to know the games they played. She began dusting the bookshelves, moving quietly, keeping her distance from both the sleeping billionaire and the envelope that screamed trap in capital letters. But 15 minutes into her cleaning, she heard something that made her blood freeze. A small cough. From the hallway. Leo. She spun toward the door, her heart hammering. Through the crack she saw him, her son, standing in the corridor, looking lost and small and utterly terrified. The storage room had flooded. A pipe had burst in the storm, and water was pooling under the door. He'd had no choice but to leave. Miriam's mind raced. She couldn't let Maxwell see him. Couldn't let anyone know she'd violated every rule by bringing her child to work. But she couldn't leave him standing in the hallway either. She made a split-second decision. She motioned frantically for Leo to come inside the library, pressed a finger to her lips, and pointed to the corner behind a bookshelf. Hide. Stay quiet. Don't move. Leo obeyed instantly, slipping into the shadows like he'd practiced this his whole life. Miriam forced herself to breathe. Maxwell Newton hadn't stirred. Still asleep. Or pretending. She couldn't tell. She needed to finish quickly and get Leo out of here before disaster struck. I'll be right back, she whispered, barely audible. I need to get fresh cleaning solution from the cart. She slipped out of the library, moving fast, her hands shaking as she grabbed supplies from the hallway. She was gone for 90 seconds. 90 seconds that would change 3 lives forever. Maxwell Newton wasn't asleep. He never was during these tests. His eyes were closed, but his awareness was sharp. He'd heard the maid enter, heard her careful movements, heard her sudden departure. And now, through the crack of his eyelids, he saw something unexpected. A child. A small boy, maybe 7 or 8, emerging from behind the bookshelf, wearing an oversized jacket and shoes with worn soles. Looking around nervously. Maxwell's mind calculated instantly. The maid had brought her child to work. A violation. A fireable offense. Ammunition for later. But first, the test. The boy had spotted the envelope. Maxwell watched, his cynicism confirmed before the act even occurred. Of course. Even children were greedy. Innocence was a myth. This boy would take the money, and Maxwell would have his proof once again. The child approached the desk slowly, reached out his small hand, touched the envelope. Here it comes, Maxwell thought. The theft, the betrayal, the inevitable. But the boy didn't take it. Instead, Leo looked at Maxwell, studied his face, saw the elderly man sleeping in the chair, his legs uncovered, the air conditioning humming cold through the vents. And then Leo did something that Maxwell Newton, in 75 years of life, had never seen coming. The boy carefully, gently, removed his oversized jacket, his father's jacket, though Maxwell didn't know that yet, and draped it across Maxwell's legs, tucking it in at the edges, making sure the old man was covered, protected from the cold. Maxwell's heart stuttered. The child wasn't done. Leo looked at the envelope again, saw how close it was to the edge of the desk, and carefully moved it 6 inches inward, away from the edge, safe from falling. Then he noticed a leather notebook that had slipped between the chair and the side table. He picked it up, placed it neatly on the desk beside the envelope, and stepped back. He didn't take a single dollar, didn't even open the envelope to look inside. Instead, he returned to his corner, sat down cross-legged on the floor, pulled out a tattered book about astronauts, and began to read, waiting for his mother. Patient, quiet, invisible. Maxwell Newton's eyes were still closed. But behind those closed lids, tears were forming for the first time in 33 years. His test had failed. No, worse than failed. It had backfired so completely that the very foundation of his worldview was cracking like ice under pressure. This child, who had every reason to steal, poverty, opportunity, a distracted witness, had chosen kindness instead, had chosen to protect a stranger, had chosen warmth over wealth. Maxwell's mind reeled. This wasn't possible. This didn't fit the pattern. This child was either a fool or something Maxwell had stopped believing existed. Good. Pure, uncalculated, fearless good. Listen, I need to pause here because I can feel some of you tearing up already. If this story is hitting you right in the chest, show me some love. Hit that like button, or as I like to call it, the "This Story Deserves to Go Viral" button. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Stories that make you feel something real, every single week. That's the promise. Now, you think Maxwell's going to admit he was wrong and become a better person, right? Not yet. Because pride is a prison, and Maxwell Newton has been locked in his cell for decades. What happens next will test Leo in a way no child should ever be tested. Miriam returned 3 minutes later, cleaning supplies in hand, her heart still racing. Leo was exactly where she'd left him, hidden, quiet, safe. Relief flooded through her. She moved to resume cleaning, but then Maxwell Newton's voice shattered the silence. Stop. Miriam froze, her blood turning to ice. Maxwell's eyes were open now, staring directly at her. His expression was unreadable, cold, hard, like stone. Mr. Newton, You brought a child into my home. His voice was flat, emotionless. A violation of your contract. Grounds for immediate termination. Sir, please, I can explain. I don't want explanations. Maxwell stood slowly, using his cane, his tall frame casting a shadow across the floor. I want to know what else has been violated. What else has been damaged? He walked to his desk chair, the expensive leather wingback, and ran his hand along the armrest. His fingers stopped at a tiny scratch, barely visible, probably years old. "This," Maxwell said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. "This chair is a 19th century original. Worth $48,000. And it's been damaged." Miriam's eyes went wide. "Sir, I never touched." "Not you." Maxwell turned his gaze to Leo, still hiding behind the bookshelf. "The boy. I saw him. He was near this chair." Leo stood up slowly, his small frame trembling. I didn't." "That scratch wasn't there this morning," Maxwell lied, his voice cold and precise. "And now it is. Which means someone is responsible. Someone will pay." This was the real test. Maxwell had abandoned the money trap. It had failed spectacularly. But he needed to know, would the kindness continue when stakes were raised? When consequences became real? When sacrifice was required instead of just offered? Or would survival instinct kick in? Would the mother throw the child under the bus? Would the child cry, lie, run? Would they show their true colors when actual loss was on the table? Miriam stepped forward, her voice breaking. "Mr. Newton, please. He's 7 years old. He doesn't understand valuable things. I'll pay for it. I'll work for free. You'll pay." Maxwell's laugh was bitter. "You make $32 an hour. It would take you 1,500 hours to repay this. 3 years of free labor." The number hung in the air like a death sentence. Miriam's legs nearly gave out. 3 years. 3 years of working for nothing. 3 years of deeper poverty, of choosing between food and electricity, of watching Leo go without. She couldn't do it. It would destroy them. But what choice did she have? And then Leo spoke. "I'll pay for it." His voice was small but steady. Both adults turned to look at him. "I'll pay for it," Leo repeated, stepping forward. His hands were shaking, but his eyes were clear. "I broke it. I should pay." Maxwell felt something twist in his chest. You'll pay? With what money?" Leo reached into his jacket pocket, the jacket he'd given to Maxwell, now back in his possession, and pulled out a small object. A toy car. Red paint faded to pink. One wheel missing. Scratches covering every surface. A broken piece of plastic and metal that looked like it had been loved to death. "This is all I have," Leo said quietly. "It was my dad's. He gave it to me before he went away. Mama says it's not worth money, but it's worth everything to me." He held it out with both hands, like an offering. "Like a treasure. You can have it. To pay for the chair. I'm sorry I broke it." The room went silent. Miriam was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. Her son, her beautiful, stupid, impossibly kind son, was giving away the only piece of his father he had left. For a lie. For a scratch that didn't matter. For a billionaire who was testing them like laboratory rats. And Maxwell Newton, the man who had spent decades believing humanity was rotten, who had set this entire trap to prove people were greedy, who had escalated with a fake accusation just to see them break. Maxwell Newton felt something inside him shatter completely. Not crack. Not bend. Shatter. Because this child, standing in front of him with a broken toy worth nothing and meaning everything, had just offered the only wealth he possessed. Had just chosen his mother's survival over his own grief. Had just proven that Maxwell's entire philosophy, his entire worldview, his entire reason for being alone, was wrong. Completely, utterly, devastatingly wrong. Maxwell took the toy car from Leo's hands. He held it like it was made of glass. Turned it over slowly. Saw the tiny scratches, the missing wheel, the faded paint where small fingers had gripped it 10,000 times. "Your father gave you this," Maxwell said, his voice hoarse. Leo nodded. He died when I was 4. The car is all I remember. And you're giving it to me? Yes, sir. For the chair. Maxwell looked at Miriam, saw the devastation in her eyes, the helpless rage of a mother watching her child sacrifice his most precious possession for a crime he didn't commit. And Maxwell realized what he'd become. Not a man testing humanity's limits. A monster punishing innocence for existing. He'd been so focused on proving people were greedy that he'd missed the only thing that mattered. Some people weren't. Some people were kind even when it cost them. Some people chose love over survival. Some people, like this small boy with holes in his shoes, had more wealth in their hearts than Maxwell had in all his bank accounts combined. Sit down, Maxwell said quietly. Both of you. Miriam pulled Leo close, protective, terrified of what was coming next. Maxwell returned to his chair. He was silent for a long moment, the toy car resting in his palm. When he finally spoke, his voice was different. Softer. Human. There is no scratch on the chair, he said. Miriam blinked. What? There's no damage. No scratch. That mark is 12 years old. I lied. The words fell like stones into water. I lied, Maxwell repeated, because I've spent 30 years testing people. Leaving money out. Creating fake problems. Watching to see who would betray me. And everyone did. Every single person I tested took something. Stole something. Proved I was right to trust no one. He looked at Leo. But you didn't take the money. I watched you. I pretended to sleep, and I watched you see $5,000 on that desk, and you know what you did. Leo shook his head, confused. You covered me with your jacket because you thought I was cold. You moved the money so it wouldn't fall. You picked up my notebook. You took care of a stranger instead of taking care of yourself. Maxwell's voice cracked. And then when I accused you of something you didn't do, when I threatened your mother's job, you offered me the only thing you have left of your father. You chose sacrifice over self-preservation. You chose love. He stood up, walked to Leo, and knelt down with difficulty, his old knees protesting. I'm sorry, Maxwell whispered. I'm so deeply sorry. I've been cruel. I've been bitter. I've spent so long being hurt that I forgot how to recognize goodness when it was standing right in front of me. He placed the toy car back in Leo's hands. This isn't mine. It will never be mine. This belongs to you, and you should never give it away. Not for me. Not for anyone. Your father left you something more valuable than money. He left you the ability to love without fear. To give without counting the cost. To be kind in a world that doesn't deserve it. Tears were streaming down Maxwell's weathered face now. You've given me something today that I lost a long time ago. You've given me hope. You've proven me wrong. And I didn't think anyone could do that anymore. Okay, I'm not crying. You're crying. If this story is wrecking you in the best way possible, I need you to do something for me. Rate this story in the comments. Give me a number out of 10. Tell me if this is hitting the way it should. Because stories like this need to spread. They need to remind people that kindness isn't extinct. That goodness still exists in a world that tries to convince us everyone's out for themselves. And subscribe if you want more of this. Real stories. Raw emotions. The stuff that makes you remember why being human is beautiful. Now, you think that's the end? That Maxwell learned his lesson and everyone went home happy? Not even close. Because what Maxwell does next will echo for decades. Maxwell Newton stood up, walked to his desk, and pulled out his checkbook. Miriam, he said, his voice steady now. You're getting a raise. $65 an hour, effective immediately. And you're no longer cleaning my house. Miriam stared. I what? You're overqualified for housekeeping. I'm hiring you as my estate manager. You'll oversee staff, manage schedules, handle household operations. You'll have an office. Benefits. A salary of $98,000 a year. Miriam couldn't speak. Couldn't breathe. That was more money than she'd made in the last 4 years combined. And Leo, Maxwell turned to the boy. I'm setting up an education fund in your name. $150,000. It will cover private school, college, graduate school if you want it. Every book. Every opportunity. Every door that money can open. Leo looked at his mother, confused. Is this real? It's real, Maxwell said, but it comes with a condition. The warmth in the room cooled slightly. Miriam tensed. The condition, Maxwell continued, is that you come visit me. Both of you. Not because you work for me. Not because you owe me. But because I'm asking. Because I'm a bitter old man who's been alone too long, and I'd like to learn from people who know how to be good. I'd like to remember what family feels like. His voice dropped to almost a whisper. I'd like to have a reason to be better. Miriam stood slowly, walked to Maxwell, and without a word, she hugged him. This 75-year-old billionaire who trusted no one, who tested everyone, who had built walls so high that no one could climb them. She hugged him like he was human. And Maxwell Newton, for the first time in 33 years, hugged back. The weeks that followed were strange and beautiful. Miriam moved into her new role with quiet competence, transforming the chaotic estate into something organized and warm. She hired staff who were kind, not just efficient. She brought music into the halls. She opened curtains that had been closed for years. And Leo? Leo visited every Saturday. At first, Maxwell didn't know what to do with a 7-year-old. They sat in awkward silence in the library, Maxwell reading the Wall Street Journal, Leo reading about astronauts. But slowly, something shifted. Maxwell started asking questions. About school. About Leo's dreams. About space and planets and whether Mars would ever have cities. And Leo, without fear or agenda, asked questions back. About business. About what it's like to be rich. About why Maxwell lived in such a big house if he was all alone. Because I thought being alone was safer, Maxwell admitted one Saturday afternoon, 6 months in. I thought if no one could get close, no one could hurt me. But doesn't that hurt anyway? Leo asked. Being alone? Maxwell looked at this 8-year-old with wisdom beyond his years. Yes, he said quietly. It does. Over the next decade, Maxwell Newton transformed. He didn't just change his will, he changed his life. He opened his mansion for community events, scholarship dinners, fundraisers for schools in underfunded neighborhoods. He met people, listened to their stories, wrote checks, yes, but also showed up, became present. He created the Nelson Foundation, named after Miriam and Leo, with an endowment of $280 million. Its mission, to support single parents, fund education for children in poverty, and provide opportunities for families who've been overlooked by systems designed to keep them down. And Leo? Leo grew up with Maxwell as a mentor, a grandfather figure, a constant presence. They had dinner together every Sunday. They talked about philosophy and business and what it means to live a good life. Maxwell taught Leo how to invest, how to negotiate, how to see opportunities. Leo taught Maxwell how to laugh, how to play, how to find joy in small moments. When Leo graduated high school as valedictorian, Maxwell sat in the front row, tears streaming down his face. When Leo got into Princeton with a full scholarship, because even with Maxwell's money, Leo insisted on earning it himself, Maxwell drove him to campus and helped him move into his dorm. And when Leo graduated college with degrees in economics and social work, Maxwell threw a party that the entire Connecticut elite attended, not because they cared about Leo, but because they'd learned that Maxwell Newton cared about him, and that was enough. Maxwell was 89 by then. His health was failing. His heart, damaged by decades of bitterness and stress, was giving out. But he'd never been happier. Maxwell Newton died on a Tuesday morning in April, with Miriam holding one hand and Leo holding the other. His last words were, "I got it right at the end. That's what matters." The funeral was massive. CEOs and senators, employees and staff, journalists who'd covered his transformation from ruthless tycoon to philanthropist. But the reading of the will, that was private. Just family. Which meant Miriam, Leo, now 21, Maxwell's estranged daughter Catherine, who'd flown in from Monaco, and a room full of lawyers. Catherine had come with an entire legal team. She was expecting a fight. Expecting to reclaim the fortune she'd always considered hers by birthright. The lead attorney cleared his throat and began reading. "I, Maxwell Alexander Newton, being of sound mind and body." The standard preamble. The legal language. And then, "To my daughter, Catherine and Newton, I leave the sum of $5 million, along with my properties in Aspen and Monaco. I also leave you my love, though I know you never wanted it. I'm sorry I failed you as a father. I hope you find peace." Catherine's face went red. $5 million? Out of a $1.8 billion estate? That was an insult. Her lawyer stood up. "This is unacceptable. We'll contest." "Please sit down," the attorney said calmly. "There's more." He continued reading. "To Miriam Nelson, who taught me that work is dignity and kindness is strength, I leave $10 million, full ownership of the Connecticut estate, and my eternal gratitude. You gave me a chance to be better. You saw humanity in me when I'd forgotten I had any." Miriam gasped, covered her mouth, started crying. But the attorney wasn't done. "And to Leo Marcus Nelson, who changed my life with a jacket and a toy car, who proved me wrong in the best possible way, who became the grandson I never had and the legacy I always wanted." The attorney paused, looked up at Leo. "I leave the entirety of my remaining estate. All shares in Newton Industries. All investment portfolios. All remaining properties. All liquid assets. Approximately $1.76 billion. The room went silent. Catherine shot to her feet. "That's impossible. You can't." "Actually," the attorney interrupted, "he can." And he did. "But there's a condition." He looked at Leo again. "The money comes with a letter." Mr. Newton insisted it be read aloud. He unfolded a handwritten note. Maxwell's shaky handwriting. His final words. The attorney read, "Leo, by the time you hear this, I'll be gone. And you'll be sitting in a room full of lawyers, probably confused, possibly terrified, wondering why a billionaire left everything to a kid he met because of a broken pipe and a rainy day. Here's why. You gave me your jacket when you had every reason to keep it. You protected money you could have stolen. You offered your most precious possession to save your mother from a punishment you didn't deserve. You taught me that kindness isn't weakness. That generosity isn't stupidity. That the richest people aren't those with the biggest bank accounts. They're the ones with the biggest hearts. I'm not giving you this money as charity. I'm giving it as repayment. You gave me back my humanity when I'd sold it for tax breaks and stock options. You reminded me what matters. You became my family when I'd convinced myself family was a liability. So here's what I want you to do. Don't just keep this money. Use it. Build something. Change lives. Open doors for kids who have holes in their shoes and dreams bigger than their circumstances. Fund schools. Support single parents. Create opportunities for people the system ignores. Become the man I should have been 40 years ago. And Leo, every time you write a check, every time you fund a scholarship, every time you give some kid a chance they wouldn't have had otherwise, remember that it started with a jacket. With a small act of kindness that cost you something but meant everything. That's the only legacy that matters. That's what wealth actually is. Love, Maxwell. The attorney folded the letter. Nobody spoke. Catherine stormed out with her legal team, already on the phone, already planning to contest, already convinced this was theft. She would fail. Maxwell's lawyers had made the will bulletproof. But none of that mattered to Leo. He sat in that chair, holding the letter, tears streaming down his face, thinking about a rainy Saturday when he was 7 years old. When he'd covered an old man with a jacket because he looked cold. When he'd moved money to keep it safe. When he'd offered a toy car because his mother needed him to. He'd never imagined that moment would lead here. To a fortune. To a responsibility. To a legacy. What are you going to do? Miriam whispered, her hand on his shoulder. Leo looked at the letter again. Read the words. Create opportunities for people the system ignores. I'm going to build schools, he said quietly. In neighborhoods like ours. With teachers who care. With programs that actually help. With a mission that says every kid deserves a chance, regardless of their zip code. He looked at his mother. I'm going to make sure no other kid has to hide in a storage room because their mom can't afford childcare. No other parent has to choose between paying rent and taking a sick day. No other family has to sacrifice everything just to survive. That's a big dream, Miriam said, smiling through tears. Maxwell taught me to dream big, Leo replied. And you taught me to stay kind while doing it. Before I give you the ending, I need to know, did this story hit you? Rate it in the comments. 10 out of 10? 5 out of 10? Tell me honestly. Because I share these stories to remind us all that goodness isn't just some fairy tale concept. It's real, it's powerful, and it changes the world one small act at a time. And if you haven't subscribed, do it now. Not for me. For yourself. Because you deserve stories that make you feel something. Stories that remind you why humanity is worth believing in. Now, let me tell you what Leo did with that fortune. 10 years after Maxwell's death, Leo Nelson was 31 years old. He'd built 18 schools in underserved communities across 7 states. The Nelson Foundation had funded scholarships for over 6,000 students. They'd provided job training for single parents, opened community centers, and created a network of support systems that kept families from falling through the cracks. But the project Leo was most proud of? The Newton Memorial Library. It opened in the same Connecticut town where his mother had worked as a maid. A state-of-the-art building with free programs, technology access, after-school care, and one very specific room. The Kindness Room. Inside, on the wall, was a framed photo of Maxwell Newton sitting with 7-year-old Leo, both of them smiling. Below it, a plaque. This library was built by Leo Nelson in honor of Maxwell Newton, who taught him that wealth is measured in generosity, not greed. And in memory of Marcus Nelson, whose legacy lives on in a toy car and a father's love. Next to the photo sat a glass case. Inside, a faded red toy car with one wheel missing. The same car Leo had offered to pay for a scratch that never existed. The same car Maxwell had returned with a promise to be better. The same car that had sparked a transformation worth $1.76 billion. Children came to the library every day. They saw the car. They asked about the story. And Leo, or the librarians he'd trained, would tell them. About a boy who chose kindness over opportunity. About a billionaire who learned that trust isn't weakness. About a mother who sacrificed everything for her son. About a moment that proved the smallest gestures can ripple across decades. One Saturday afternoon, Leo was visiting the library when a little girl approached the display case. She couldn't have been more than 6. Worn sneakers. Jacket too thin for the weather. Eyes wide with curiosity. She stared at the toy car for a long time. "Why is it broken?" she finally asked. Leo knelt down beside her. Because the most valuable things in life aren't perfect. They're loved. But it's in a museum case. Like it's important. "It is important," Leo said gently. That car taught a very rich man that money doesn't make you wealthy. Kindness does. The girl thought about this. My mama says we don't have much money. Does that mean we're not wealthy? Leo felt his throat tighten. He saw himself in her. Saw every child who'd ever been told their circumstances defined their worth. You want to know a secret? He whispered. She nodded. The wealthiest person I ever met gave me a jacket when I was cold. He had almost nothing. But he had everything that mattered. And that one moment, that one choice to be kind, changed the world. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small card. The Nelson Foundation Scholarship Application. Give this to your mama. Tell her someone believes in you. Tell her kindness is currency, and you're already rich. The little girl took the card carefully, like it was made of gold. Thank you, mister. No, Leo said, his voice thick with emotion. Thank you. For reminding me why we do this. That night, Leo sat in his office. Not the grand corner office in Manhattan, but the small room in his modest house that he shared with his wife and 2 daughters. On his desk sat 2 photos. One, Maxwell Newton, ancient and smiling, at Leo's wedding. 2, his father, Marcus Nelson, holding infant Leo in his arms, that red toy car visible in the background. Leo thought about legacy. About the chain of kindness that stretched from his father's love, to his own choice in a library, to Maxwell's transformation, to 18 schools and 6,000 scholarships and countless lives changed. He thought about the toy car, the thing he'd been willing to sacrifice, and how that moment of vulnerability had become his greatest strength. And he understood, finally, what Maxwell had been trying to teach him all along. Wealth isn't what you accumulate. It's what you give away when it costs you something. It's the jacket you offer when you're cold yourself. It's the sacrifice you make for someone else's survival. It's the kindness you show when the world gives you every reason to be cruel. That's the inheritance that matters. That's the legacy that echoes. 23 years after a rainy Saturday in October, CNN ran a feature story about Leo Nelson. The billionaire who started as a janitor's son, the headline read. They interviewed him in the Newton Memorial Library, standing in front of that glass case with the broken toy car. You inherited $1.76 billion at 21, the reporter said. Most people would have bought yachts, mansions, lived a life of luxury. You built schools instead. Why? Leo smiled. The kind of smile that carried decades of wisdom. Because I learned something when I was 7 years old that most people never learn, he said. I learned that the richest man in the world was dying of loneliness. That all his money couldn't buy him trust, or love, or peace. He was trapped in a prison of his own bitterness. And what freed him? A jacket, Leo said simply. A broken toy car. A small act of kindness from a kid who didn't know any better. He looked at the toy car in the case. Maxwell Newton didn't give me his fortune as charity. He gave it as a thank you. Because I gave him something money can't buy. I gave him a reason to believe in people again. I proved him wrong. And being wrong saved his life. So what's the lesson? The reporter pressed. What do you want people to take away from your story? Leo was quiet for a moment. Then, the lesson is this. We spend our whole lives afraid of being vulnerable. Afraid of being taken advantage of. Afraid that if we're kind, we'll be seen as weak. Afraid that generosity means loss. He leaned forward, his voice intense. But Maxwell Newton died the richest man I've ever known, not because of his bank account, but because he learned to trust again. To love again. To believe that goodness exists even in a world that tries to kill it. And you, the reporter asked, do you consider yourself rich? Leo thought about his wife, his daughters, the 18 schools, the thousands of students who'd walked through doors they never thought they'd have access to, the single parents who got job training, the families who didn't have to choose between food and rent anymore. He thought about his mother, retired now, living in the Connecticut estate Maxwell had left her, spending her days volunteering at community centers. He thought about the toy car, still broken, still precious, still teaching lessons to children who stopped to look. "I'm the wealthiest man alive," Leo said, "because I was taught that wealth isn't measured in what you keep. It's measured in what you give. And every single day, I get to give something that matters." The interview ended. The camera crew packed up. But before they left, the reporter, a woman in her 40s named Sarah, approached Leo privately. "Can I tell you something?" she said, her voice soft. "Of course. I grew up in Detroit. Single mom. Poverty. The system failed us 100 times over." She paused, tears forming. "My daughter just got accepted to one of your schools. Full scholarship. She's going to be the first person in our family to go to college." Sarah's voice broke. "You didn't just change her life. You changed our whole family's trajectory. And you did it because some old billionaire gave you a chance, and you decided to pay it forward." Leo hugged her. This stranger. This mother. This woman whose story was his story was 10,000 other stories. "Tell your daughter something for me," he whispered. "Anything. Tell her that kindness is currency. That generosity compounds. That the smallest act of love can echo for generations. And tell her that one day when she's successful and people ask her how she made it, to remember, someone believed in her when the world said she didn't matter. And to go find someone else to believe in." Sarah nodded, unable to speak. That night, in homes across the country, people watched the interview. Some cried. Some called their families. Some donated to the Nelson Foundation. And some, like a young single mother in Ohio, watching on her phone while her son slept beside her, made a quiet promise. "Tomorrow, I'm going to be kinder. I'm going to give something when it costs me. I'm going to be the jacket someone needs when they're cold. Because that's how change works. Not through grand gestures. Through small ones. Through 7-year-olds who give their jackets. Through mothers who sacrifice everything. Through billionaires who learn to trust again. Through you, watching this story, deciding that kindness matters more than self-preservation." Maxwell Newton spent 75 years believing humanity was rotten. One child proved him wrong in 12 minutes. And that 12 minutes changed the world. So here's my question for you, wherever you're watching this. What's your toy car? What's the small thing you could give today that might change someone's life tomorrow? What's the jacket you could offer when you're cold yourself? Because here's the truth that Maxwell Newton learned too late and Leo Nelson learned just in time. Kindness is the only currency that multiplies when you give it away. The more you spend, the richer you become. The more you offer, the more you have. The more you trust, the more trustworthy the world becomes. So be the change. Be the jacket. Be the kindness that someone desperately needs. And watch how the world transforms. If this story meant something to you, if it changed how you see wealth, or kindness, or what really matters, then subscribe. Share it. Tell someone who needs to hear it. Rate it in the comments. Let me know where you're watching from and what lesson hit you hardest. Because stories like this don't just entertain. They remind us who we're supposed to be. And in a world that tries to make us cynical, that tries to convince us everyone's out for themselves, that tries to kill our faith in humanity, we need these reminders more than ever. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And thank you for being the kind of person who believes kindness still matters. Now go give someone your jacket. The world is waiting.